Taso. So let's talk a little bit about Toptal. Do you want to explain to our audience what you do for a living?
Sure. So we contract out high-skilled laborers to companies all over the world, mostly in engineering, finance, product management, project management, and design. And so we'll find high-skilled individuals and then have those individuals work either individually or as teams with those companies globally.
Okay, and let's talk about how you guys are set up. We just heard that it's one of the largest fully distributed workforces. How does that go?
Yeah, so we've
workforce.
invested a lot of infrastructure into running a fully distributed workforce. We don't have an office, and so as a core team, we're a bit over 1,500 full-time individuals. In terms of our contractors, we're well over 5,000, and so we have a lot of folks who we're managing in a distributed way, and we've had to invest a tremendous amount into infrastructure and, quite frankly, just running a company in a remote way.
So you were doing remote work before remote work was cool. Maybe you have some advice for how companies who are maybe newly remote, who've been remote since the pandemic, on how you can operate that way. When we were backstage, you were discussing the fact that early on, you guys didn't even have video calls, you didn't even meet people, you didn't even see their face before they were hired.
That's correct.
Good, bad, like?
Well, when we were a startup sub 50 people, we didn't really have to have video calls because you're so tightly knit as a small company. And even in a remote organization, when you're chatting with folks, when you're hopping on calls, even if they're not video calls, you're able to communicate in a way that's just really effective. And I find that to be true in many sub 50 person companies. As you scale, you bring on new types of people, older executives, people who are wanting simply to see you on video or wanting to interact with others on video. And so there's a impulse or a sort of a need that compels you to make the decision to go from a, let's say, more online environment to a more video standard type of remote work environment. And so the transition has been interesting because, again, when we were sub 50, it was just a much more seamless experience. But again, we have to deal with the types of problems that I think every company has to deal with, which is, hey, we have more seasoned executives coming on board. They require
So this isn't even in
video,
person. You're saying you didn't even like have a Zoom meeting before, and now you have to have these Zoom meetings because you have a lot larger staff, older people.
Yeah, and also as you manage people in a remote environment, for some reason, I'm not sure what it is, I'm sure someday someone will do a study on this, the video calls are more effective for managing larger groups. I'm not sure what it is, but I could say that I and others in the company have noticed that, and I've heard similar from our peers who are running large remote companies as well.
We talked about backstage, you were saying that you have a very successful 1,000-person Zoom call once a month. What does that look like? Like, what is a good Zoom call with that many people?
Well, a good Zoom call with that many people is making sure that there, first of all, isn't 1,000 people having a conversation. And so setting up the structure in advance helps. And we do that with a lot of our calls. In fact, not just the 1,000-person call that we do every month, but the multi-100-person calls that we do every single month. We call those ROBs, basically rhythm of business calls that we have with our different functional leads or different groups within the organization. We ensure that we prepare well in advance, probably a bit more prepared than you would find in a typical non-distributed organization. And so ensuring that you set up the meetings well, ensuring that you set up everything so that the structure is really well defined and the meeting is just fluid, it makes a huge difference. And in fact, I would say if you do it properly, it's better than having a meeting in an in-person environment.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about these Zoom calls, like how to run a company remotely, but I've been asking everyone I've run into at this conference who seems to also work remotely, why work remotely, do the vast majority of your job remotely, and then come to an in-person event or come to a company off-site or a meetup? Like, where does this fit into your whole remote business?
That's a great question. In-person events forge trust and they build relationships. And so the same can be said in Toptal as well, we have offsites. We actually have rather large offsites where we bring together new recruits, new individuals who have joined the company to build those relationships and build trust. Now, once that trust is in place, it acts as a foundation, a very solid foundation for folks to work together in a very fluid, very seamless type of way. And so it's not required to have in-person conversations every single day or every single week to forge trust and relationships. But to start, it can be very beneficial. And we even see that with our clients where our freelancers or the distributed teams that we create for them fly on site to work with them. And then they actually go back to their respective home countries and work remotely for them, whether those are Fortune 500s or startups.
So it seems like a little bit goes a long way with like in person, especially in the beginning. How much of this do you need? Like, do you have an offsite 5 times a year? Do you go in the office 1 day a week? Like, obviously it depends on the company, but what's the sweet spot for you guys?
Well, in 2022, in fact, we did more than 50 offsites this year with
But not the whole company at once, just like...
Not all at once, no. But we sort of made up for the lack of offsites in 2020 and 2021. And so we brought folks together. We hired tremendously. I think from 2020 to 2022, we more than doubled the company. And so there were a lot of new relationships, there were a lot of new people, and we wanted those folks to get together. And so we brought them to offsites, and that did a tremendous service in regards to trust. It really built trust in a very meaningful way.
All right, let's talk about the people on your platforms, like the freelancers on your platforms. These are people who are traditionally working remotely even before the pandemic. They go off and work at a different company. Now that a lot of companies are calling people back to the office. Does this not apply to the freelancers? Or are they getting the message, like, we have to come back? Like, what are you hearing?
Well, it's a really interesting dynamic. So if you unpack that, what you see is that folks who are being called back to the office are, in many cases, we see this because they apply to work through Toptal or they apply to work directly with us, right, insofar as our corporate roles go. They're wanting to leave their jobs and join either Toptal itself or companies like Toptal that are fully embracing remote work. And so what I can say is, without a doubt, remote work is the future for top talent. And people recognize that. And I think that anyone who says otherwise, whether it's the Jamie Dimons of the world or others who are extolling the virtues of the antiquated in-office experience, they're going to feel the pain of that because those folks who are top talent in those organizations are simply going to leave. They'll take pay cuts, they'll lose benefits simply to work in an in-office environment. And so, simply to work in a remote environment. And so that forcing the in-office experience, I think, is just a bad mindset, and I think it's a very ossified way of running an organization.
Right, there certainly seems to be a tension there. More and more people are working freelance, working contract work, and at the same time, there's this trend to move back to the office. Like, how do these companies square that, or are they just losing people?
They're just losing people. They have this mindset that these folks want to work in an office and that the pay is good enough and the benefits are generous enough at their organizations. Again, if you're JP Morgan, you probably had this mindset for the last 100 years. Well, guess what? Now you can go to Argentina, make 6 figures from a US company, and you're tripling your spending power just by moving. So how is JP Morgan going to compete with that? Allow everyone to work in Argentina? I don't think so, only for the reason of mindset. That's it. So it's a pretty unbelievable fact, but it's true. And so you're going to see this shift because you have an older generation running these older companies that think that they have the ultimate card to keep their folks, but in fact, that's going to change real quick when people realize they can buy mansions in Argentina making 6 figures from a US company.
Right. Do you have any numbers behind this, like what share of people like this is really important to? Because obviously it depends on your career, what stage of life you're in. Like, will people really like leave a place because it's not remote? Like, yeah,
Oh yeah, we have hundreds of people from Google, Amazon, Goldman Sachs, you name it. They work at Toptal now. They left those companies singularly and only because of this specific fact. And guess what? They took pay cuts from those companies to join our company. And so empirically, we know from experience that this is the case.
let's talk about trends in freelance in general. We know that more and more companies are hiring outside. Where do you see that going?
Well, freelance is this rather amorphous term because it's mixed in with the conversation around 1099, W-2, and
Also gig workers, yeah.
Right, and then you have the remote worker aspect. In our line of business with high-skilled labor, engineers, product managers, project managers, finance experts, the idea of a freelancer, especially internationally, is really just somebody who works remotely for a company, and that doesn't have a legal box to put it in. They're not 1099, they're not W-2. In fact, they're what is called, from a tax perspective, a W-8 Ben worker. It's a W-8 benefit. It just basically shows the flow of money so that the IRS can know where funds are being transferred from and what the purpose is. And so when you have folks working remotely as freelancers, in fact, a lot of the times they're just full-time folks who are working remotely in different countries. Now that changes when you have country-to-country company and freelancer. So if it's US freelancer to US company, that'll become a true freelancer relationship. But outside of that, you actually work in the confinements of a more full-time like engagement, which is the model that Toptal offers.
Okay. So where do you see this going in the future? Like, is it 50% of the workers are freelance, or?
I think that in terms of remote work, freelance work, and the whole trend in relation to that, it's going to become the predominant way of working, not because of the Fortune 500s, not because of the fact that they're adopting them or not, but because of the fact that the most successful companies that are being created are remote companies. And it's for no other reason than the fact that they are more capital efficient by a significant margin. So they don't have to pay leases, they don't have to pay real estate, they don't have to pay any of these elements. If you look at Spotify, for example, they signed, I think it is a $500+ million 10-year lease in New York City just for their secondary office, not even their main office. And so you take $500 million off of the balance sheet or off of your financial statements, that makes a huge impact. The same can be said for startups. And so startups are recognizing this. And also, there have been studies from Harvard and other places across the spectrum of academia that have proven remote work is more efficient. And it's particularly more efficient with smaller groups. And so you might work at a large Fortune 500 or hear some gossip that, well, it doesn't work well in our organization. That may be the case because it's already a 10,000 plus organization that had to go through this tumultuous experience of everyone working in office, not needing the infrastructure, and then instantaneously, most likely because of the pandemic, being forced to go remote, having that tumultuous experience, and then the executive team or the board of those companies saying, hey, look, we have to go back now.
Right. There is a push in the US to reclassify a lot of gig workers as employees. You were mentioning before that these freelance workers are essentially, they're going and working at different tech companies. Where do you draw the line between someone who's an employee and someone who's freelance?
Well, again, it depends on, is it country to country specific? Are you working with the freelancer and the company in the same country, or are they in a different country? And so this is a new paradigm of employment where you're able to hire someone in Argentina who works for you full time, and they wouldn't technically be an employee, but they also wouldn't technically be a gig worker.
Right.
And so it's still up for debate. Now, the probably more interesting path that this conversation takes is, well, how do we eventually get to what this will be defined as? And that will require cross-border type of relationships from governments. And so Argentina and the US will have to codify something over the next, I would imagine, several decades to figure out what that looks like. Otherwise, you'll have folks who are freelancing in Argentina but are full-time employees in the United States. And so there's a new type of paradigm in terms of employment that's coming to reality. It's coming to reality now, in large part because of remote work, but it's coming.
All right, say this doesn't, say we don't codify this, and because it seems like things like that don't seem to happen. I get one of the fears with freelance work is you could hire someone from anywhere. It's the benefit and the fear, right? It's like, this is great. We could hire the most talented person anywhere we want, but also, does this mean that we only hire people from other countries who would make less money? What does this do overall for wages? Does it drive them downward?
That's a good question. I don't have any data to have good insight into that area, but I would think over time that it has the potential to do that, but at the same time, the benefit of hiring someone who's a US employee or has a US-centric work experience that that employer can draw off of, I think will make them more valuable than folks outside, let's say America. And I'm using America because I run an American company, and I know there's a lot of folks in the audience who are from America. However, the wage issue I'm not really able to speak to, but I could see it actually going both ways.
All right, let's go back to remote work for a second. We're kind of running out of time here. Any advice to companies that are considering giving up their leases, that are considering going fully remote? Maybe they don't go the first 5 years without seeing someone in person. Maybe there's a different way to do things now. Like, what are their top 3 things that you think they should consider when they're going remote?
Things to consider when going to remote. First, have solid infrastructure technologically and policy-wise.
Does that just mean Zoom, or does that mean what?
That means how your Zoom integrates with your Slack, integrates with your Google or Microsoft calendars or whatever services you use. But whatever conferencing software you use, whatever online chat system you use, and whatever calendar and email system you use, you need to ensure that they're all fluidly working together. And so infrastructure technologically is the first, and then policy-wise, you need to make sure that you have really good policies in place for meeting etiquette, remote work etiquette. One of the most annoying things, and I'm sure we've all experienced this, is when someone who's an A-plus professional shows up to a Zoom meeting, it's not blurred, the room, the background is messy, and it really impeaches the whole credibility and integrity of that individual, regardless of how well they come off on that meeting.
You really have a policy that says blur your background or clean up your room?
Make it well kept. And so ensure that it is clean, ensure that you're representing yourself in a professional way, as ideally you would at this conference. And so you want to make sure that you have a good physical and aesthetic experience with that individual, not something that's messy or that you have a camera that is, blurry. And so I would think that's the most important piece of advice. And there are a whole other slew of pieces of advice, but I think those are the 2 probably most important.
All right, thank you so much.